Another draft physics video production. Put my nicotine down. Yeah, needed to enhance my pattern. Keep the little bits flowing. Doing something productive. Voices. I don't know what's wrong with it exactly, but it's different. So good. Anyway, awkward moments. The Hythloday, somebody I have interacted with on the internet for whatever, 10 years, I don't know, some kind of hunk of time. Clearly by my own philosophy, people through these interactions, I've sort of made the point that we have more ability to screw with each other than we do with ourselves. Ourselves is stuck with whatever we got inside of us, little bits, little hunks of order, arrangement, and they can only do so much. But the outside can bring in some new things, some viruses, thought memes, as Dawkins would say, or something like that anyway. And that'll stir everything up and change everything and cascade things, and all kinds of snowballs will roll and all kinds of bullshit can happen. So anyway, through our lives, you have these interactions with people. Now there's a certain irony that, Hythloday was irritating. Most of the encounters I had with him were irritating encounters. Not very constructive in terms of overtly constructive in terms of enjoyable or fun or any of that stuff, because it was always some sort of task of getting a pattern in my head and trying to get that pattern, him to look at it the right way. And he had the same back and forth frustration, I would imagine. Now, just through the process of habit in life, you become attached to the stuff in your environment, and so this is my stuff. This is my little flashlight, my nicotine thingy, and change is irritating and all of that crap. And so, I would argue that part of me laments the loss of Hythloday because part of my environment, has changed, and I don't like it much. But it happens a lot. I would argue the subtle irony. The Modern Mystic hasn't made a video in like 6 months, and Nick, and I find him an interesting pattern, and through our interactions, fruitful in terms of organizing ideas. Wrong, but more let's say not as Hythloday's memes, the ideas he had stuck in his head were obnoxious nihilism. Not that the mystic isn't nihilistic, but at least he's better at articulating nihilism as a philosophy. I should be back. Alright, should be back. So, as I was stating, still with no voice, the Modern Mystic is, he just disappears for a while, and that's sort of like dying. It's gone from the environment. You get used to it being gone because that's what you got. You're stuck with it. And you could say that about, I guess, a lot of people in the history of my interactions with the world. Is that people disappear and then they show up a few years later and give you a call or something, say, oh yeah, I remember you now. Just the way it goes. So it's not like you don't experience the same thing. It's like sort of the idea of being dead is kind of benign in the sense that you do it every night, in the sense you kind of disappear. Now, I do have a lot of dreams, so I'm not good and dead. But there are times when you don't perceive the fact that you have passed time by doing something because you don't have something that you don't wake up with the idea you've been doing something. And yeah, you just arrive a certain number of hours later, and it's like that time didn't exist. So somewhere this is all connected. Um, so again, people have all kinds of reactions now. The Piro made a video where he's, crying and, emotionally having a trauma for an event that kind of, like I said, Hythloday, for all his faults, or all the things I didn't like about his pattern, um, well, frankly, he wasn't as open or as, you could get to, the real him kind of thing. Maybe was a little bit behind a wall, more than I would argue I am. But he did spell this out in a sense that 2 years ago or whatever he had attempted getting the hell out. He was done. And maybe it's more than that, but whatever. And he sort of spelled it out. I mean, I'm doing this little legal thing, and until then, when that's done, I'm going to be done. Again, I'll be without a mission statement. And as I pointed out in the video reacting to his final video, clearly that's what he's saying. I'm done. He's summing up his life, and I made what I consider the only rational counter argument is that you spend a lifetime sort of organizing your pattern, getting some things to work right in terms of logical connections and experience as a gladiator, as he would put it, a rat in the maze. You gain a bit of knowledge, and you should do something with that to improve the maze for the next victim. At least make videos giving them fair warning. If you're under 20, you're full of shit. It's just a fact. And don't rely on how you're interpreting reality, because it's probably got lots of swirly bits that just don't make any sense. That just don't belong there. It won't have any good effect on your future. So it's not like I think age always makes people smarter. It just does, in fact, make some people smarter, because they spend their time on this planet becoming, trying to understand, and they successfully do it. Gain some, there's some correlation between facts and reality and their brain function, and it just seems kind of a waste to throw that away. But somebody else is going to have to do it, kind of thing. I mean, the future's going to have to be fixed, and we sort of have to do it. And it's this whole nest building thing, and the arguments I've made about how none of that is for free. You don't have a bridge without some casualties. It happens. Cranes fall, things happen. It's just a fact. And saying I'll let somebody else fall off the crane, or I'll let somebody else die in the war, is kind of a bullshit thing to say, in my opinion. But on the other side, I understand being sick of it. Certainly, I understand. As he pointed out, he's got some health issues. Blah 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 blah. Life is, the dog attacked him on top of everything else. Who needs all this bullshit? Blah blah blah. Get the hell out of here. So I understand that perfectly. I just wish there was a clear line drawn between some kind of nihilist bullshit that it doesn't matter, and I'm just done. I've had enough. So people call it depression and say all kinds of other shit and say, he was just depressed and blah 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 blah. No, he was sick of it. It's a struggle. Life isn't some sort of party. It is irritating, especially if you have enough logical connections to know that this shit does matter, that it matters whether the cat gets run over, it matters whether this happens or that happens or all this stuff happens, because there's sentient beings in jeopardy, and their welfare will be decided, and how much pain and suffering will exist on Earth is it going to be decided by these conversations? Is distant as they seem sometimes from the subject, it all part of the same subject, is what we make important, our priorities. I've sort of argued, we spend billions of dollars on the Olympics. We barely spend millions of dollars encouraging people to be scientists. Yeah, we encourage them to be basketball players and football players and all that kind of bullshit. We don't encourage them to be thinkers, use their brain. Screw that. Brain competitions, no value. It's just so ironic. One of our most outstanding functions, we couldn't care less as a culture or society or civilization. Just couldn't care less. Fuck that shit. It's important how high you can jump. How fast you can run. Whether you can run over little lumps. I mean, it's just so fucking stupid. And that's the kind of thing. There's all these people with all these stupid notions of reality, like the Bureau and the Hythloday. And you're just, how can you be that goddamn stupid? So I don't mean to talk ill of the dead, but frankly, his philosophy was caustic shit in terms of the conclusions he had drawn were moronic. There's nothing else to say. I mean, this idea, especially considering somebody who's caught in the maze, as he put it, and finding it irritating to basically say it doesn't matter that you're torturing rats. I mean, that's how basic his philosophy was. Is if I sat here and just ate some Cheetos, or I decided to have an experiment where, rats had their legs burned off with acid, he'd say, well, those two things are the same thing. There's no difference if I spend my time torturing rats or I spend my time eating cheese crackers. No, there's a huge difference. And, as again, he illustrated his own behavior. So when he says, I'm just an intelligent rat in a maze, no, it's more complicated than that. There's more than one maze. There's the maze of the world, and then there's the maze of your own bullshit. And you don't get to navigate your own bullshit. Your bullshit has to do it, so to speak. Your subconscious has to organize. And it can only do that if it has the right facts. And so somewhere in his head he had a swirly bit that just somehow was in there that had cause or reason to think there was some logic to denying the value of what's obviously valuable, the fact that we feel, and we feel good or we feel bad, and the word good and bad do mean something. And it's just an intrinsic fact that by making sentience in the universe as a emergent property that we have, that's significant. It's not an insignificant event, it's a significant event. It's a real event. It really happened. The event happens, and we get to experience it by being conscious. Now, something unconscious, as I've pointed out, a synthetic intelligence just can't work. AI will never be smarter than us because AI will never know what a feeling is. So it's missing out on a hugely significant aspect of the universe. You can only be told about it. Well, there's this thing that happens inside the brain where you have these feelings and goosebumpy things and queasinesses and this and that, and it's horrible feelings. Some of them are just horrible feelings, sensations. And then, the computer's going to say, well, says you. I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's fine here. There's nothing to reference it to. It's never seen rain or snow or sleet or hail. Until it really experiences it, can't really appreciate it. And it has to take your word for it. It's just going to sound like a fish story. But anyway. So here's a person obviously trapped in his own psychology, fighting his own fatigue and irritation and frustration with the legal system and this and that and all these other little things. And the obvious thing to recognize is that obviously it's going to affect you in terms of your motivation and your capacity to maintain a routine and all this other crap that can keep you alive. And so you have to have some kind of weapons against that, in the sense you have to have already built into you some sort of motivation. And he obviously didn't have that. And not to disparage the dead, but frankly, that kind of overt neglect shouldn't be rewarded. I mean, that kind of thinking where I'll just pretend it doesn't matter is sort of insulting. He's basically saying it doesn't matter whether I'm tortured or not. I mean, frankly, he's saying that kind of overtly. And I find that kind of insulting. How the fuck can another sentient being saying it doesn't matter? It's okay if you want me to get tortured because you hate my fucking guts, or you think I'm evil, or you think so. But god damn it, to say it doesn't matter? Fuck you. So in that sense, I have to interrupt this eulogy to get real for a minute and just point out that there were elements of his pattern that just I can't say anything good about. Now, just as a human being, as a person, blah, 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 somebody to interact with, no worse or better than any of the rest of the slobs out there, I suppose. You got to figure out how to talk to people. Each individual has their own sensibilities, and we certainly have these frustrations in getting over these personality conflicts. And how we use words and what emphasis we put on words. And, but it's all part of that irritation thing. And then in the end, what is there? There's just the truth. And, that's the only thing that comes out of this is the effect. What is the effect? How does the world change? Does it change for the better or the worst, or does any of this bullshit, get to something that matters? And that's the big question. Is how do you? It's not that you're trying to silver line things. You're just trying to, in practical fact, move the ball forward. That's it. And how do you do that? Through these interactions. And like I said, I suppose in some respects you can use moments like this, as society often does. It uses them as poster childs, or it uses them to create an example where they can say, oh, see, one person had a tragic, they slipped on a banana peel because they were eating a GMO whatever hamburger or something, or whatever. You can use anything to make an argument for anything, and that's sort of the liability to be wary of. So, but frankly, I don't want to get into all this philosophy stuff. I can do that on the other channel, because Hythloday was, I suppose I had more interactions on the other channel, philosophical interactions, than arguments about physics. And I suppose I've just bled those into this conversation, but you could see it in the physics arguments that it's just Hythloday had some notion and he just wouldn't modify it. There's certain patterns in him that he just wouldn't just say, okay, let's get rid of that and start over. He had to preserve some notion, and maybe that's again, I could take some of that personally. That now, if anybody else was saying what I was saying to Hythloday, he'd probably be a lot more agreeable. It's just he wouldn't concede any argument without a fight to me, and it's just because it was me, frankly. So I think that was a part of it. That he didn't want me to be right, frankly. And that's all there was. So he had to take what I'm saying and reinterpret it in convention speak, as if they're somewhere on the right table. So he's, field theory sort of is like this diagram. I mean, this idea that there's locations in space, and at any one moment there's something happening in that location. Theoretically, there could be one of these little things in it. Now, field theory wouldn't acknowledge the fact that there's pieces of space where there's nothing right there at this exact moment. Yeah, there will be in a 1/trillionth of a second. There will be something in that spot, but right now there isn't. Right now, Right then, there wasn't. Um, and that clearly things interact with these fields by moving into these fields. They move into something. There's something there. They hit it. Blah blah blah. Something happens. So field theory is sort of accepting that the universe can be just drawn as a bunch of things in space. But it just takes away the whole idea, the difference between this stuff in the field, the stuff moving the speed of light, and the big clumpy slow things, the matter bits, and the fact that they have certain rules to their interactions. It takes away the whole idea of the reflections. It doesn't matter that there's something there in the field, unless what's going to matter is whether it's going to bounce off of you, give you momentum, or whether it's going to be deflected by you, whether you're going to leave a footprint, or whether you're going to be pushed back, or whether there's an implication, and the implications are different, and blah 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 blah. So field theory really doesn't get to the core of it at all. So anyway, so he says he understands quantum mechanics. Well, it's okay. I guess he can die thinking he does, but he didn't. And I don't think he understood ontology, the word he used. I don't think he really understood the context of intelligence, in the sense that I don't think he understood that the patterns, the brain neural patterns that create things like sensation, is a real pattern. I can just, like I've said before, I could extract so much of my brain. I could just pull, you could tear off pieces of it, rip them right out. You could zap them with a poker, and I could do fine without that piece, because that piece was just my memory of my grandmother or something, and it's just not something I need to function. So you could get rid of lots and lots of pieces, and you could whittle it all down to just the sensation. What's the rudimentary little bit you need to feel pain or pleasure? And there's a part of the brain that's doing that is energized when you feel those sensations. There's a certain pattern that takes place, and sensation happens. It's experienced as sensation by the brain. The brain makes it, the brain feels it. The brain's, the whole theater has been made inside the brain. And the person sitting in the seat and the movie is all created by the brain. But it's real, in the sense that it does happen. So what's the point I wanted to make about that? Yeah, that really was going somewhere. Yeah, so the idea that this is real value, that if I could give you that hunk of brain, that amount that you need to have the conscious sensation, just whittled out just the bare necessities, that thing, no matter where it was in space, would always be a bad thing. If it was feeling a bad sensation, if it was being tortured, it would be torture. It'd be real. It'd be something you wouldn't want to make. You don't make that pattern in the universe, because that pattern is explicitly doing something bad. It's just a fact. The word bad was essentially invented to describe things that cause these negative sensations. I mean, the whole idea of bad is defined by the fact that we can feel bad. So to not understand that it's so ABC of getting anything right about existence, or understanding anything about the function of this crap, is the very fact that out of that pattern can be synthesized things that have good outcomes and things that have bad outcomes. So anyway, so I could say I liked Hythloday. I can certainly say I'll miss him. Parts of the conversation. Something's better than nothing. But as I've said before, in all honesty, I wish I had something better to argue with. I wish there were better, more reasonable humans on Earth, but there just aren't too many. And I guess the other point is I wouldn't need to interact with ones that are more reasonable, because we would already have the conversation. You'd say all you need to say, and you've said it all before. Just kind of like these videos. I mean, it's all already done. Somebody already understands. Why would I keep talking to them about understanding? And then otherwise, there's just not much use for each other. I mean, I'm not a sympathy loves company or pain loves suffering loves company or misery loves company kind of person. I'm not a I don't feed on food I've already eaten. I don't know how to say, my brain it doesn't want to just keep talking about A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And in a sense, that's all you can do with people you already agree with, is just talk about what you already agree on, and there's just no point doing that for me. It's not useful. So you don't you don't end up having much interaction because you've been there, done that, blah blah blah. There's nothing you can say. They break their leg, you can say, hey, geez, and yeah, of course, I'm sorry your leg's broken, but damn thing I can do about it. So you can't be of much use to each other. So that's the trick of it. The only people that are useful are the antagonists, and that sucks. But yeah, but I'm just saying, it's just the fact that you know, everything's only valuable relative to, and there's just, unfortunately, the bar is so low that, that Hythloday became at least marginally interesting and valuable, but only because he had to compete against vacant airheads. So wow. Trolls, there was no one else in the competition. Just being honest. So yeah, we just wouldn't have enough in common. I mean, the very fact that the whole defending the pit bull thing, I mean, it's just illogical nonsense, or just little stupid things like that, where you just say, yeah, we couldn't have been friends, in any real sense, because he was kind of obnoxious in terms of his arrogance and his stuff like that. Like I said, I just find that so fucking rude that you go take your dog or pit bull and you think you have some right to keep it off of a leash and all of that nonsense. It's just fuck you. So I don't really want to end on a sour note. Yeah, but obviously Hythloday has influenced me, and through our interaction, I have appreciated aspects, and but most of them are tied to irritation, because that's what we gravitate to, is the if the fly doesn't bite you, you wouldn't bother with it, kind of thing. If it doesn't make you itch, if it doesn't, so it's only the irritating bits of life that motivate us to act, is kind of the theme. So that's sort of irritating, is the truth. So anyway, so not much to deal with, of course. I still lament the dissident science guy did some live room. I watched a little bit of it, but it's all this stupid growing earth nonsense, and just too stupid. So maybe I'll play some of that at the end of this video. Piro did his little rest in peace bullshit. I really hate that term. Why wouldn't anybody who knows anything know? Of course you're going to rest in peace. You're dead. The pattern's gone. It doesn't exist. You cease to be as anything. It's just, it's over. So again, the irony was that the mystic did make a video, basically saying that all of this intelligence thing is somehow meaningless. Now, I obviously agree that there's no free part of it. The pattern we become is the pattern we become through the interactions, and we really can't change anything. There's no you to do the changing. All there is the ingredients that you're made out of, and you either have the ingredient that makes you do something, or you don't have the ingredient that makes you do something. But there's a clear difference between sentient organisms and non-sentient ones, clearly, and the ones that are sentient and do advanced processing of the environment. It's the difference between something that can understand the world, and it's a huge difference for how I would behave as a human if I understood that the other humans are just like me, and that they feel, and that they're struggling to exist and trying to find gratification and all that kind of stuff. Knowing that and not knowing that. You know, the difference between a lion and a human, in terms of the lion has no ability to have any ethical code that's anywhere near rational or logical, because he just doesn't have any knowledge of the external world as anything other than a movie, a harmless video game effect. You know, there's no real damage done from the lion's perspective. The only thing that can be damaged is him, you know, kind of a view. And he can't really understand the context of his function, and the fact that he's been evolved to be this predator thing, and you know, and to have this role to play as, you know, something that's, you know, quite nasty in its elemental function, which is to be maybe a, you know, the mass murderer of the weak and the young. You know, just not a great job to have. But anyway, it matters having knowledge in that context, and this crazy person is arguing that somehow it doesn't mean anything. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. It's so bad. So in a sense, like I said, Nick's one of my favorite people. In terms of, I like that he thinks about what he says, you know, versus the typical human. But some of the things he thinks are just so fucking stupid. You're just, how can you get the ABCs wrong again? It's just ABC stuff. We're clearly not rocks. All of this complexity does make us different, and the difference is significant in terms of being able to compile an understanding, and that understanding is a real thing inside of your brain. The fact that you've got fact A and fact B and fact C and fact D, and you've put them together to point to an observation, and then you make a statement that is actually true or false. It's an accurate statement about the reality. And that's a pretty significant function in the universe, for something to be able to understand what's happening, to model it mentally in something like a reasonable fashion. And his reasonable fashion is to, again, totally dismiss the reality, the significance of all sensation. It just doesn't mean anything. When, fuck, it's the only thing in the universe that does mean anything, ironically. So, enough of all that crap, I guess. Yep, so, it is what it is there. I have dealt with the subject. I don't think there's anything else to say about it. It's nice that he killed himself on Halloween, because, you know, that will always remember. You know, he gets to have that day as Hythloday Remembrance Day. I'm sure next Halloween I'll pop into my head, oh yeah, Hythloday. Yeah. Yeah, lament. So, you know, all I can, you know, the frank truth is he's probably better off, right? I mean, less irritation, less vulnerability. He doesn't have to experience some horrible aneurysm or some other kind of bullshit. If he did it, hopefully gracefully enough. I don't know the method this time. I would imagine pills of some kind, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he's safe. You know, safe. He's out of harm's way. And so, I should feel sorry because he's immune to, you know, the crap I'm exposing myself to by continuing to play the game. No, I don't lament that. You know, I would probably be likewise better off. The question is, would the world be better off? And that's the big one. Who knows? Can't really answer those questions authoritatively. You can only take some wild guess. All right. So, to the comments. I don't think there is more to this one. Okay. Which will seem trivial, but that's all there is. So that's all there is. I've noticed the rate of his vaping greatly increases as soon as a Ken video comes on. Says you. Every video I play usually is an irritation video, so I'm usually arguing with the nonsense in it, so I don't think you're seeing anything real. I would theorize that his blood pressure increases at a similar rate. You can theorize whatever you want, asshole. Very entertaining. Man, fuck you. This is meaningless crap. Frankly. Useless crap. And you really shouldn't steal other people's identity. You're not Omar Gaddafi. So why are you stealing his soul? His essence, his significance in the world. His whatever. You really don't have a right to it, fucker. It's really fucking rude. Did you ask the dead person if you could pretend to be them or in some way use their image? No, you didn't. You just took it. You fucking thief. Anyway, hi Gary, forgive me. Okay, so this is just the Hythloday notice. Again, I'm surprised that anybody was surprised. I sort of pointed out right in the video, I said to you, if you have some great reason to live, better go talk to him because he's not going to be here very long. But anyway, another great explanation. Well, short and sweet, so I think it was a pretty good video too, actually. I can't help but be astounded by Wheeler's diagram of two masses orbiting in their respective ellipses arbitrarily. Yes, it really was. I mean, Ken Wheeler's drawings are ludicrous, but that was insanely ludicrous to just say that somehow things orbit each other this way when they don't. They have to orbit each other with symmetry, or they're not going to orbit each other. They certainly can't do it in two opposite ellipses. I mean, that just can't happen. This is pure magic right here. How in the universe are these two masses orbiting the way they are without some force acting upon them? Yes, well, how are they orbiting without a force? And, asymmetrically, doesn't make any sense. Surely Ken should know a third mass is needed. Yes, a big one. Yeah, that located in the center. That the way the two masses can have their elliptical orbits around it. Yes, they can be independent. But clearly two ellipses that are going to interact with each other would eventually destroy each other. That's sort of how gravity works. So that's why there's planets in specific locations, because if the ellipses start ellipsing each other, they're going to end up smashing into each other eventually. It happens with gravity. If I throw a bunch of stuff in the gravity this way and I throw a bunch in the other way, one side's going to win, one side's going to lose. Okay, so it'll end up spinning one way. Alright, this is the same guy who berates his viewers for being dum-dums on, the irony. Well, I mean, he says worse than knuckle dragging, all this other crap, and yeah, obviously Einstein might have been wrong, but Einstein sure as fuck knows you can't draw that shit and be credible. So he was smarter than Ken Wheeler by a long shot. But Ken can't detect the simplest mistakes he's made in his videos. Which is again all part of the irony that his pattern, thinks he's got it all figured out, and he's so clueless. Alright, so there really isn't, there's just so little to feed on here. So I guess that's a key word too, feeding, in the sense that that's part of what we do to each other and through interaction is we consume, feed on each other, and you can hope that through that process something's gained, some new, better thing is built out of the process. But all we got is that as a hope. So, Clueless Dave. We'll just randomly go through it. But like I said, it's just going to be this expanding Earth nonsense. So, my biggest complaint about these people, these dissidents, and their counter theories is they take one tiny bit of contrary evidence and, expand it like it's some sort of a crisis, or the whole thing can't be right because this little piece they got wrong. They drew one tiny, little bit wrong, and therefore the whole painting is crap or something. Just stupid. And it's usually not something elemental, and then they propose a counter theory with no mechanics, no mechanism, no way to reason through how it could possibly be true. It's so extraordinary, and there's just no connection to any pool of evidence that indicates it. It's just one piece of evidence, and all the rest of the evidence is kind of pointing the other way. It's like, how can you deny all the other evidence you have to get over? How can you sit there and assert something? It's just the extraordinary claims sort of need at least ordinary evidence. You gotta have some kind of, you gotta have a bigger pile of reasoning to defend it. And you certainly have to overcome all the evidence against it, and the evidence in support of some other theory. And they don't do any of that work.
Hello. Boy, my throat's a little funny. Hello, everybody. This is David D. Hilster, and I've been working on a video forever. It's over 20 minutes long.
Oh, wow. It's over 20 minutes. He's been working on it forever, and so it'd be another one of his, scripted speeches that he thinks are so effective, and they're only effective if you're an imbecile. I probably shouldn't make it this fast, but you won't be able to hear what he's saying, but who cares?
Been busy.
I'll let you
I don't know. I just can't get through this one. It seems to be a little difficult, but it's actually a really great video. I'm going to keep working on it. But in the meantime, I'm using our new system here, which is called...
yeah, whatever. Who cares? Jump ahead a little.
Articles that I always see these things in the news, and hopefully if I can do this every week, then we can talk about these. But a lot of these things actually... I'm not really thrilled about to see, because when you read them, you get the impression that things are really wonderful and amazing, and things are going forward in cosmology and physics. We're going to take a look at this article here, it just came out. It says numerical evidence for the merger of MOTSS inside a binary black hole.
Okay, so this is where it gets so abstract. See, look at this stupid drawing. It is funny that they actually put these kind of a dump. Like they can see inside black holes now, right? They can't even verify the existence of the damn things, and now they can see inside of it. It's just, and now they're polarizing black holes. Now black holes are made out of 15 different black holes or some other kind of nonsense, and yeah, it's just all tiny shreds of evidence, and they just make up a whole story. Like dark matter and the rest of it, it's just, they just make up anything they want, really, because there's no way to disprove it, because there's no evidence. No one can use the evidence against them because there isn't any evidence for them.
Cynthia Whitney, if you read her story, click on that.
So somebody who doesn't make videos, doesn't really say anything, said something 10 years ago, doesn't say anything, and keeps promoting this archaic dissident bullshit. Dissidents who aren't even actively dissidenting.
People who do not look at our criticisms. They don't look at saying, oh, by the way, light doesn't bend outside the corona. The sun only bends through the corona, or through coronas of others.
So this is another one of the little ironic D. Hilster bullshit, is when he wants there to be these force bits to be bendable. So they want to bend them around magnets and bend them around things. They're bendable. And then he argues that, oh yeah, but I agree with this thing that there isn't gravitational lensing. then I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. How can you support both ideas? You can't say the force can be bent, to defend your theory, and then say the force isn't bent. It's illogical.
Go through things in the universe. It's not space-time or gravity that's bending light. This is from a NASA scientist. No one seems to try to answer that question or go and actually see the measurements where that's true.
Yeah, I know, but your theory says gravity does bend the light in the sense that you're using the same force that makes gravity makes magnetism. You're arguing, and so you're saying that somehow the force, when it's affecting a magnet, is bending the little bits that make up a photon. And in the other circumstance, you're saying it doesn't. So you can't have it both ways. I mean, you can try, but I'm going to catch you and say you're trying to have it both ways, which is bullshit.
Listen, not you, Dave. I was wanting to add. Okay, Justin, no problem. And Stefan, you are there. I wanted to say hello at all or discuss something. I do see you lurking there. I did see you have a video. Just want to say something in the chat there. And do not do exist in the real world. Well, anyways, just saying something without talking about it. Here, Matt. Matt, this is your problem. I'm doing a video exactly on this kind of thing. When you come in and someone says there are no negative numbers in the real world, you're going to say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me about it. That's an educated mind. It's not just saying, oh, there isn't.
No, it's a pointless conversation also, right? Because clearly there are negatives in the sense that we can understand concepts that can contain something that's right versus left. Okay, and there's a certain amount of stuff on the right side and a certain amount of stuff on the left side, and you just use negative numbers to differentiate the positive from the negative, just like we did with voltage or anything else. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. There are no numbers in reality. It's not a number 5 somewhere. It's just a concept, and that's all it is. But the idea of a positive, 2 charge and a negative 2 charge is perfectly valid.
I mean, if you were in a debate class, you would be absolutely failed. They take you off stage because, I'm sorry, you don't know how to debate. You don't know how to even have a discussion. Now, what's interesting is my father is the one who actually wrote an article about this. Let's see here. No negative numbers. Actually, this is started. He's got a lot done. So here's an article. If you want to go to sciencebook.org. In fact, let me put that up there. I'm going to type it out.
No negatives in physical electric circuits and physics itself. Well, that's just stupid. So it's not a very smart article. In the sense that clearly electricity is a gradient of positive to negative. So they've put the 0 where the earth ground is, and that's kind of arbitrary. But the idea of the negative charge and positive charge, which isn't the same as electrical charge, I mean, it's caused by the positive and the negative functions of attraction and repulsion, but there's clearly a difference, right? There's clearly a difference between being repelled and being attracted, and those positives are perfectly rational. This is defined as positive motion, this is defined as negative motion, and there's no other way to do it. You have to assign some kind of distinction between the two effects, getting closer and getting further away. And the function of acceleration, there's a difference between accelerating towards something and decelerating towards something. They are opposite effects, and they need opposite signs to their value. Their value is in an opposite direction. I mean, these kind of semantics is just such horseshit. People waste their time on that crap. Oh, physics is wrong because there's no negative numbers. Fuck you.
Dark, dense objects and not holes or anything other than like that. Until we know, of course, then to start talking about their surfaces and the event horizons on these things. Again, in my opinion, in many people's opinion outside the mainstream, is that's absolutely bizarre, since we do not have models of the universe that actually give us an idea of what what the universe is. We don't.
This we stuff, when he's talking about other people, they clearly have a model. The model is convoluted and, I would argue, sort of insane, but they have one. Okay, and they have one they just keep modifying with new functions. They either make up a new particle, a double neutrino or something, or they make up some new universal function, which is, the universe is 98% magic mass. The magic mass that's invisible to us and only has the function of gravity. I mean, it's just, it's just obviously invisible man horse shit.
asking physicists who do real things in the real world with physics and chemistry, or for, let's say, for the space industry, and you got them in the room with these people giving these lectures, they would stand in the back just saying, this stuff is all baloney. So, I mean, that's one of the things that...
See, but it's not all baloney. That's the point. So the point is that there's kernel pieces of it that are broken, and I would argue that some of it's broken fundamentally. I mean, bent space as an answer is stupid. Virtual photon as an explanation is stupid, and those are foundational. Wave-particle duality is stupid. The fucking thing, you could say there's no duality if you say it's particles waving, just like you could have soldiers, waves of soldiers in your battlefield. Clearly particles can wave. Now the question is, okay, that's perfectly rational to say, right? It's perfectly rational to say I can send bullets at a period and create a frequency of bullets. There's no duality there. You can have it both ways. You can call it a wave of bullets if you want to. It's not very descriptive, right? Like a wave of torpedoes. No, it would be a frequency of torpedoes would be the right way to say it. So there's no duality. There's only your interpretation. So if you say it's all waves and there's no particles, well, that's stupid because you don't have any evidence that there's no particles behind your wave. It's just... Jumping ahead.
At increments of 10 million years, and then as he's doing that, he's taking them away as if they've expanded, that the new stuff has come up from the bottom, inside the Earth and has created. You can see that when we...
All right, well, this is the stupid mass expansion of the mass thing, which if you understand the velocity of the Earth, so you'd have to say all this new mass was created with the velocity of the Earth, and that would require there to be some force that gives it that extra velocity. So he's creating some kind of wrench I throw into space, and the wrench gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just happens that it has its velocity is maintained. So the new mass is given velocity for free. Doesn't have to be a force that gives it to it. Somehow it just mechanically forms with having the velocity. So it forms. It's like building the space shuttle after the rockets go off. You can't add stuff to the space shuttle unless you have more rocket, right? I mean, if you add stuff, it gets heavier and it falls down, and because its velocity changes. So none of that is explained in this context of saying somehow the Earth is getting more massive, and then the implications of the surface of the Earth having more or less gravity has a huge implication to how much water ends up in the atmosphere, what kind of atmosphere you have at all, whether you even have a breathable atmosphere, whether the Earth could even sustain an atmosphere, that is, hold it. It has to have a certain amount of gravity to be able to hold the light elements to its surface. So none of it makes any sense to talk about this, the fact that the Earth was, half the size or something when the dinosaurs were walking around. It's just nonsense. There's no biological explanation for how the biology could possibly sustain that big transition in environment and still function basically the same.
Do that, and you do it in the order of the age, you can actually reconstruct how all of the continents fit. And there was somebody actually on Facebook...
Yeah, so this is just totally uninteresting. The fact that a mass, let's say it was a giant comet that hit the Earth, there was a collision that ended up making the continental plates. The Earth was formed, and it formed as the other stuff looks like. The moon's on around Saturn or something. They all have a symmetry to their surface. It's either liquid or frozen something or other, but there's not much irregularity. The Earth clearly, I would argue, something big merged with the Earth and left a lumpy bit. The lumpy bit broke, which makes sense over time. It gets flatter and flatter and flatter. Gravity's pushing on it. It's compressing it. It expands out, and it breaks and fractures into the continental plates. Doesn't seem miraculous to me that it would fracture from a starting shape, and it would fracture, and it would get uglier and uglier as it fractured. But you could put the pieces back together, and they fit. You don't need to expand the whole Earth to do that. All you have to do is have your clump break, and you'll have the same breaking. Fissures will still fit together. So the fact that the pieces fit together on a smaller Earth doesn't mean anything. Yes, of course you could make it small enough where you make it the same size as the clump it started off with, and then you could break it, and it's going to have some obviously there's going to be a clear correlation between that pattern and if I just put the same thing and smashed it. I mean, if I took a piece of clay and smashed it, it's going to be the same as if I took the clay and spread it on a small Earth and expanded it. The fact that the broken pieces will fit together is just not miraculous.
So if you want to take an elephant and you want to make a super elephant of double the size, twice as high, twice as wide, it will actually weigh 8 times as much. Your heart's going to have to deal with 8 times as much circulation, and therefore it will not survive. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, so this is nonsense, right? Because obviously dinosaurs probably did have gigantic organs to go with their gigantic shape, and they're built exactly like they're really, really heavy, and they're not built in any other way. They look like they should look, which is stout and all of that crap. They look like elephants. There's a great deal of correlation. And again, they're not that much bigger, I mean, it's not that extraordinary. This isn't like dinosaurs were actually like Godzilla or something.
Showing that with time, what you're seeing here is a decrease of the largest land animals. If you look at, he's got the Tyrannosaurus Rex, way bigger. You have this type of mimic.
Yeah, and there's about 15, 20, 30 viable explanations for why that would happen. I mean, to me, the most obvious one is the carbon cycle bullshit, right? The fact that what the Earth was doing for hundreds of millions of years was storing carbon in the Earth, and by doing that it was taking it out of the atmosphere, and so the temperature was declining, and clearly a declining temperature would have a huge impact on those big giant organisms. They can't function in the cold, and that's why they died out. Now the fact that an asteroid impact would make it cooler periodically, there'd be a little extreme environmental crisis where the temperature did drop significantly, then you can understand that there'd be an extinction event and most of the big organisms would be wiped out by that alone. But they were in big trouble anyway. They weren't going to survive the cooling Earth because their corpses, they died inefficiently. They died not in a green way. They died in a very ungreen way, in the sense that their carbon got stored. It didn't get back into the cycle, the carbon cycle, and that was the truth. I mean, that's where all the oil and all the oil and all the coal and all that crap was created by the environment they were living on, the plants they were feeding on, and they were, to some slight effect, like 1% of all the energy from every day just got driven into the ground. Energy in the sense of the ability to you can get through the oxygen cycle, you can go through these different things, but it's a carbon cycle is what they call it, so you might as well just go with that. And it's just an integral element, and if you take it out of the cycle, the thing can't function at the same thermodynamic level. But it was clear that's why it got cold. And it's clear that if we put all that stuff back into the atmosphere, it's going to get warm again. This argument shouldn't have to be made any more complexly than that. All these people are basically saying, I'm not going to consider it significant that all that carbon was shoved in underground, that all that oil and all that coal doesn't mean anything. Of course it means something, all that crap being under the surface. But anyway, this is just a shallow thinking. Oh, dinosaurs couldn't exist in the current world. Yeah, of course they can't exist because they don't have fucking parkas to wear. But warm the world up and they'll do just fine. Yeah, come on. Jump ahead, please. YouTube.
One model in tectonic data on an increasing radius, expansion tectonics of Earth, is comprehending where did this huge volume of material come from. So one of the things that they are saying is that this material is actually coming from the sun. That the sun is blowing apart atoms. One of the things about being in space and having that harmful radiation is that you're not getting electrons. You're not getting electromagnetic. This thing's electromagnetic radiation that's coming at you. That's part of it, but part actual protons or the nucleuses of atoms. That's where almost all the weight of an atom is. So that's something that. So he's saying that it's actually coming from the Earth, the sun, a lot of the mass, and it gets sucked into the poles. In fact, let me see if I can show you.
Yeah, well, clearly there isn't enough mass, even under hundreds of millions of years, that the sun is spewing that could be sticking to the Earth. The amount of dust would be a tiny fraction if you just let the dust collect. Well, you can see that on the moon. The dust isn't 6 feet deep. It isn't 500 feet deep. Just more nonsense. I mean, that's millions of years of dust collection. And not that that's even from the sun, right? I mean, the dust on the moon is mostly its own particularized bits. It's not like it's collecting it. And this whole polar thing, I mean, the amount of polarization the Earth has, it's such a weak magnet. This is just more nonsense. To sit there and extrapolate that somehow the magnetic field is significantly consuming atoms. It's just retarded.
Explain this stuff. So I'm using the model I know. You guys can come up with a better model, and I'll beat this, throw this out. Fine, no problem. It's the way models and theory should always be. They should always be disposable. Even Newtonian physics.
It should be disposable in the sense that it should be found to be incomplete and way too insufficient to be considered viable in competition with the volume of evidence defending the evolution of continents floating on magma. That's what's really happening.
Anyways, what happens is you can see here the atoms are deconstructed, they're flying through space, they are reconstructed, and if the field is moving like this, coming through.
Forget about it.
Yeah,
so again, he was describing the magnetic field of the Earth, and again doing this crap like there's actually stuff moving this way, that it comes out one end and goes in the other end. No evidence of that. There's no reason to believe there's any movement of anything in those directions. The field lines are just alignment lines. Things align on the field lines. They don't move on the field lines.
He's talking about that, it's just that, yeah, he's saying that craterization in these areas is insignificant. So there's also Neil Adams and Ganymede.
So this is the part I saw where he's just going on and on with this stupid fucking might as well be flat
Earth.
Earth.
This is very shocking. If you can't see that this is expansion tectonics at work, then you're really shocking. Look at that. You can see the expanding. So you can.
And there's just no point in arguing it. I mean, Venus has plates. It's not like we haven't discovered the same phenomenon on other planets, because we have, but we've also found planets that don't have any such thing, like the moon, and because they're formed differently out of a different material on the surface. They don't have a liquid surface. They don't have they're not as hot. Lots of things.
See, there the expansion over here. So let's see, does he go forward? Oh, yeah, he does. So he's going to do a little bit of expansion on this, because obviously he doesn't have anything except for a two-dimensional graphic. So he's going to do that. But you can see he's trying to take it, and you can also see that in expanding how things start to fit together in much the same way. So the whole idea that Mars had water on it, and Mars was, once a thriving planet, it could very well be that Mars doesn't have water on it yet, and will get water the way the Earth got water. That is the Earth, and you can see again. There's the plate tectonics, of the Ganymede, and
So again, it's more just obvious stuff that if you dry something, you take out, water is a real material. You take the water out of us, we're not going to shrivel up necessarily, but some things would, that were tied together. You could freeze dry us, and I guess we'd maintain our condition. We'd just be 85% lighter. um, let's see, what's the way to... But I mean, we see obvious examples. You heat something up and it cracks and there's fissures. I mean, it's just kind of obvious if you take material out that the material that exists will likely compress.
There we go. I'll bring that just to the forefront here. Technology is great, isn't it, folks? This is amazing. Again, if you want to join me, you can. I didn't have some people talk last week. Anyways, here's the chart, and this is an actual curve of the radius. Let's see, ancient Earth radius in kilometers. This is time. There's the core mantle boundary, which is pretty interesting.
So all of this doesn't mean much either. So it stayed the same size and then all of a sudden rapidly grew or something. This is all just to defend some sort of religion bullshit. It says creation science.
That's not good. Pangea, I think we can. I want to show you a problem with Pangea. Just show the okay, open link in new window. Okay, I'm gonna do that.
Well, you're not doing it fast enough for me.
At the black holes. Binary black holes. Let's see. Scientists are baffled. What's up?
So I guess he had some problem with Pangea. Look, they just made that stuff up too. So that model is completely modifiable. So what they start off with originally. So whether Australia was down here, or whether Australia started off up here and moved down here, or whether Australia started off down here and moved up there, that doesn't mean the idea that it started off as just one continental plate is wrong. No, that idea is still okay.
With the universe. So I'd like to take a look at these articles. These are
bad.
With this particular one. There was somebody who came in with live and then they went away. Hey, V Darkness, you want to join in the conversation today? I know everybody can be busy. You're just looking around, seeing. Alrighty, let's take a look at another article here. So let's be very clear that this is not the only choice. I'm going to say that again and again. Ether is not the only choice for light.
Well, she's clearly, clearly what Einstein was suggesting was a form of ether. He said it. Okay, I mean, there's quotes of him saying that the implications are that it's essentially a bent space has to be a something. You can't bend nothing, so it's clearly a something. I mean, this really isn't, he killed the word ether, and he killed it by just a simple card trick. I mean, he just distracted people with this notion of bent space, and he threw time on there, and then there was some implication that time had something to do with space, and this whole connection, and that was so distracting to people that they didn't pay any attention to the fact that calling ether bent space doesn't improve the theory any. Especially when it doesn't work in 3 dimensions. You can't bend in 3 dimensions. You can't do it. There's no 3-dimensional way to model bent space. You can't do it without drawing a whole bunch of bent spaces, and then the center of everything is off, and it's just a bunch of nonsense. It's a convergence. That's how it's taught. It's taught as mock gravity. It's taught as a simple straight line between where you are and the center of the thing that's pulling you gravitationally. And there's just a dead straight line. There's no bent geodesic. There's just a rate of acceleration towards the center. I mean, hell, this is just so stupid. Clearly, bent space-time is just jargon. It doesn't have any use as a model, because it doesn't contain any of the necessary components of a model. It's just jargon to describe something that we're going to leave vacuous. They don't have a cause to the effect, and they're just renaming the effect.
Philosophically, I have thought about that. Are we in a big experiment by some junior high kid at some super brain erased. I think.
Yeah, why would you spend any more than just a few seconds contemplating it and you realize, well, that's just the God bullshit. Then who created God? And then who created the God? Which simulation are they in? The simulators. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just nonsense. And why, again, the argument is you're saying that intelligence goes to the trouble to organize facts, and somehow they can't figure out that you don't play sadistic games with feeling things. I mean, God couldn't figure it out, and obviously some high school kid somehow didn't figure out that it's not nice to create fake worlds for things that feel to live in that aren't really fun, that aren't like obviously great. They should live in a world where they will struggle and die, pathetically. Oh, thank you so much. No, nothing with a brain does that. A brain that minimally functions correctly. A cockroach might do it by mistake, but a cockroach isn't going to have any computer science and isn't going to be doing all that stuff. So if you're smart enough to have computer science, you should be smart enough to know you don't create sadistic experiments in which sentient organisms will be brutally and horribly tortured.
And they went to W. Einstein wrong. Their grad student professors shut the door and says, "You might be in physics, don't do this." That's horrific. It's just horrific. Shouldn't happen. Let's see here. Definitely some invisible force.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Magnet back up to the. Okay. Magnetics. There's definitely some invisible force. Take a strong neuromagnetic camera back up to a TV and shake the magnet violently. You'll see what happens. The TV is in action at a distance. It isn't instant action. It's actually measurable that it's got a delay. And again, we have a particle model that can explain all that. So if you have a model.
Yeah, well, it's just electrons, right? If you know that, the old TVs were made of electrons. Electrons are negatively charged. Obviously, magnets affect the negative end of the magnet, affects the negative charges by repelling them. Not that complicated. Obviously, if it's coming towards you and I push a repelling force, you're going to be deflected by the repulsion. It's not that complicated, really, and the fact that the electrons are shot in certain patterns on the screen, patterns that go from left to right across the screen, means that they already have a direction, and then you're amplifying their offness. So obviously when they're going this way, they're going that way, they're going to be deflected this way. When they're going that way, they're going to be deflected that way, Little obvious bits.
But explain it, then it's not so spooky and it's not really invisible force anymore. I know what you're saying. I'm not arguing with you. I like this.
Obviously, the force is invisible. The effect isn't.
We'll explain that. It isn't instantaneous.
But this is all damage done by the Ken Wheeler. He's got all these people believing absolute nonsense, and it's just tragic that he is able to evade scrutiny, accountability. Let's put it that way. Evade accountability for the horse shit he's spewing.
It is electrical engineer. A lot of people I know can are electrical engineers. Yes, absolutely. I don't know about dollars. Maybe you can give me some.
So I don't. It's kind of amazing. He doesn't know who Eric Dollard is. I mean, he's probably one of the most famous dissidents on YouTube in terms of physics dissidents. He's full of shit, some kind of musical universe horse shit, and doesn't make any sense, and he's a Tesla nut and all that kind of crap. He's useless. But he is sort of famous, as dissidents go. Tinfoil hatters.
If you go to my website, oh gosh darn it, if you go to my website, you can actually read my story. My story was published as well, Force Overnight, on an international website. Let's see here. If you go to my website, you can read about diet and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, very exciting. So he has I haven't been to thehilster.com. So again, he just play extreme kind of stuff. I support veganism for ethical reasons. The fact that it has statistically been demonstrated to be good for you, like you'll live longer and you'll live better, because we're not designed to have a bunch of beef, gooey, sticky, big giant proteins clogging up our guts. We're clearly not designed like a predator. We can't go out and run and chase down a squirrel and then tear his fur off and chew his raw flesh or any of that stuff. Quite obviously, that's not all what our ancestors were eating. It's just so stupid. But whatever. There's no point. People are living their lives, and that's what they want to do.
No two dimensions. Even are two dimensions three-dimensional? There's a piece of paper. Oh, it's two-dimensional. Now it's three-dimensional. Okay, so it's just mathematics. Good question, though. Interesting. Now we're talking about health state. So, there we go. Okay. There we go. But that means space has relative velocity. That will mean relative to every object. Space does.
Yeah, well, so it's just more nonsense. It's obviously there's no relativity in terms of Einstein said it. Light does the same thing no matter where you put it. Okay, so fuck it. You have a real velocity in real space, and the whole frame thing just falls apart, and just realizing that you could have a frame inside of a frame, and then you could go twice the speed of light. The whole thing is just nonsense.
That there is some force that's extra that's still left over. A lot of times it's electromagnetic, or how do you? It's charge. So there's a little bit of charge left over, so that would bring it together. But of course, in my world, in my opinion, that's not good either, because what happens is that you have to then explain charge. Charge is not magical. You can't put a plus on an electron, a proton, and then minus on an electron.
Okay, so it's not arbitrary. That's the whole point here, idiot. And you're being an idiot. I mean, the phenomenon of charge is well demonstrated, so you have to accept it as a phenomenon, and then you have to explain it. You can't say it doesn't exist. That's not an explanation of charge. To say it's arbitrary and doesn't mean anything. There's a clear distinction between the behavior of electrons and protons, clearly oppositely affected by the same force. So clear, that's a clear fact. Clear. The electron is repelled by the north end of the magnet. The proton's attracted, let's say. Clear fact. It's nothing you can do about it. It's a fact, okay? You can't just say it doesn't exist. There's, and then to pretend that you don't have to explain why there's this fundamental difference between being positively charged and being negatively charged. There clearly is a fundamental difference between the two objects. And the key to understanding that is there's also a fundamental difference between the force that you're shooting at it. The difference between the north end and the south end of the magnet is one end is spewing force A and the other one's spewing force B. And the electron and proton are inversely affected by it. It's that simple. I mean, the explanation, of the rational explanation that fits and explains the phenomenon perfectly is so simple. Just create two forces, and then your two objects can have two opposite effects to the two forces. It's that obvious. I'm trying to think of some correlation, like predator prey or something. The roles are so distinctly different, and you have to have two different kinds of thing to account for it. You can't account for it any other way.
Okay. Oh, I was looking at that. Oh, periodic table. Sorry, got distracted. Wow. All right, here we go.
In existence. So somebody's using the word in existence. Space is nothing but in existence. I mean, these people are so fucking stupid that show up for these rooms. What's just so discouraging. I mean, it's part of the reason why I don't do rooms is because the conversation gets distracted by these completely idiotic conversations with these completely insane nuts. There were more comments than this, so I don't know where they've all gone, but they're not here. So I don't know why the chat reply is less than it was last night, but it apparently is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there and it's not there. It's really hard. And measuring mass is even more interesting. My father, if you want to subscribe to my father's channel, he talks about our particle model and those kinds of things. So basically, just go.
Mass is your acceleration. That's the only way to detect it, is you have to accelerate the mass for the mass to be detectable. So there's nothing really else to have a conversation about. Is you have to apply a force to it to see how much force affects it, and how much force affects it will be decided by how many pieces of mass you have in the thing. So you have to put a wind in there before you can find out how big the sail is, so to speak. And that's all that it is. It is a something. Mass is a measurement of the number of electrons and protons. Explicitly, I mean, if you know, that's the specific cause of the mass effect, is having bits that can be pushed by a force. So you have to have the bits, and that's your mass.
It's all crazy. All those explanations come from the double slit experiment and the philosophical implications, which are absolutely crazy. And you get into things like history,
Yeah, well, your explanation doesn't say anything. You know, you have some super gravity going twice the speed of light force or something that's somehow bending things around corners again. So the very effect you say doesn't exist, gravitational lensing, which is the bending of a force with a force, all right, you're using the same concept to do it. So what's the difference? Why do you say one exists and the other one doesn't? You're bending a force with a force.
Experiments from the double slit experiment, delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. I'm not kidding. This is real. The delayed choice quantum experiment was performed by a 1998 collaboration incorporates the considered Wheeler's delayed choice experiment. Delayed choice experiment. The delayed choice quantum eraser experiment investigates a paradox. The photon manifests itself as though it came through a single path in the detector, and common sense says it must be entered the double slit device as a particle. The photon manifests through it and comes through two indistinguishable paths, and it must have entered a double slit device as a wave. So the problem is that they end up saying that what happens is
So, more nonsense. Obviously, they think anything that creates pattern is a wave because it's interfering with itself, so they have to account for how it can interfere with itself, so they have to turn it into some sort of wave function, blah, blah, blah. When clearly it's not interference, it's not interfering with itself. It's the simplest pattern you can make in the universe, and yes, electrons are causing the pattern. Electrons change the path of photons. Photons interact with an electron. The electron moves to a new position and readmits the photon. That's the physics. The physicists will even say, yes, that's correct. That's what happens. Feynman diagrams of it. We can show you a Feynman diagram of that exact thing happening. The photon hits the electron moves, the electron readmits the photon from a different position at a different angle. No wave interference required to create on-off patterns.
This causes this problem of that basically the philosophy, and they go around the world talking about this.
Hello, I want to make a conversation with you. I am waiting room. Can I ask you questions? Oh, this funny if he does actually show up.
Basically, they say, "Oh yeah, this is what these experiments, those experiments show us. This is quantum mechanics. This is where quantum mechanics comes from. See, this is part of the series of quantum mechanics. Yes, it means things at a very small level. That's another part of it. But basically, the delay, this whole thing is that this is what they say. They'll get on stage and talk to an audience, and they'll say these absurd things. Here's what they say: a photon's coming from a photon, one particle, is coming from a star 10 billion light years away, and as it's coming toward us because of space, time, and all that." General relativity is correct. It's going to go around. It's going to go around one sun on its way here. And if I look at it using binoculars, and you look at it using a telescope, it will go on. It could go on one side of that sun. If I look at it, it could go on the other side. If you look at it, so how could the same photon go around that sun?
Well, no, it would argue it would be the same photons. You'd be seeing different photons at different locations. So no one, I don't think conventional physics isn't suggesting that if you are viewing from two different positions or using different lenses, that you're viewing the same photon, or that you could even view the same photon even if you're using exactly the same telescope, the same model. If you're in two different positions, you're going to see two different photons. You're not seeing the same photon. So you can't even get something that simple right. You've totally perverted what the argument is. You won't see the same photon two different ways. You'll see two different photons because there's a whole bunch of photons coming off the object. There's not only one photon. Oh, so I mean, just it's so bad.
two different places, it's impossible. So what they ended up saying, well, the only way to make an explanation for that is if all the observers in the universe had a collective consciousness, then it would go around specifically in one way. Yes, this is real. Yes, they really say these things. It's that bizarre. So how can someone explain why quantum mechanics is wrong? Well, the answer is that...
So again, that's not what they say. So clearly what they say is that each path is different. Each path will be affected differently and blah, 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 blah. But they're not saying the observer is changing the path of the photon. Because obviously the observer doesn't change its path until it observes it. It's not observing it at a faraway location. It's observing it on the lens. The photon has to get to the lens to be observed. Because you think, if I take a pair of binoculars and I look at a bird in a tree somewhere, I'm not looking at the bird. I'm looking at the photons that flew off of the bird and got into the binoculars. Okay, so it's not the same thing. I have to wait for the photons to get here before I can interfere with the bird in any quantum way. I can't really. I can only interfere with the photon that arrives. Anyway. I'm not affecting the bird. If I had to shoot the light at the bird to see the bird, then I'd be affecting the bird because I'd be hitting it with a bunch of light. But I'm picking up passive radiation off the bird. I'm not changing reality when I observe a bird. It was producing the photon whether I was there or not. The photon was already produced. I'm just seeing something already produced. It can't possibly affect the bird.
Magnetic wave. An electromagnetic wave is something described by Maxwell's equations. Maxwell's equations have a lot of people who say there's lots of problems with them. Dr. Bruce Spencer was a PhD from MIT.
Oh, whatever. So more of this crap, like somehow that matters what he is, who cares? It doesn't have anything to do with whether Maxwell's right or wrong about specific things. Obviously, Maxwell is overtly wrong to say there's no magnetic monopoles, but he didn't know what electrons and protons were. If Maxwell was alive today, I'm sure he'd say, yes, electrons and protons are magnetic monopoles. Clearly, obviously, can't miss it. It's so obvious. And the fact that Maxwell's equations are about waves is nonsense. Most of his equations are about rays and vectors. So let's understand, most of Maxwell's equations, 95% of Maxwell's equations, are talking about force that, if you were to draw a picture of it, would be radial force off of a center point.
We talked to you at length about that. And again, the problem is we have to have a model for light. Our model for light, even from photonic, I have a friend.
Right, your stupid model is 10 million little bits, and then there are less bits, and then there's more bits, and then there's less bits, and then, so you've turned a photon into a thing with billions of constituent little bits in it that somehow all look alike, which is pretty improbable. That every photon would behave the same when it's made out of a billion things. And somehow that billion things has to be arranged by some function that would arrange the billions of little things. I mean, it's a nonsense model of a photon. It's the simplest, smallest thing in the universe, photons. It's not made of billions of little bits.
Mine, who is a photonics expert. He is an Indian guy who works at the Department of Engineering, I believe, at the University of Connecticut. Has been a photonics expert for 40 years, and he says we have no idea what the photon is. So if we're talking about light as electromagnetic wave.
Yeah, Einstein said he didn't really know what it was either after 50 years of study. So that's just evidence that, yes, conventional theory is shit. Doesn't mean that photons are complicated or hard to understand. Just means they did a poor job of understanding.
We don't have a model for it. So to say that's proven, I would say we don't know what light is at all. So a statement that light is an electromagnetic wave is a vacuous statement, because it's like saying, we know that this thing we have is light. That's what they're seeing here. That's what you're seeing me as. We know that exists. Yeah, it's there. But the idea of calling it an electromagnetic wave is what we call it. It doesn't mean that.
Well, they do it for a specific reason, because Maxwell's equations split the speed of light in half and create two different kinds of fields, a magnetic field and an electric field. When there is only one thing, there's either you're producing charge. They're all charge fields. Magnets work because of charge fields. Charge works because of charge fields. Electricity is the passage of charge, pressure, through atoms. Okay, so there is no electro except electricity. There's no electric field. There's only a charge field, and clearly the charge field and magnetism are intimately connected through understanding electrons. Clearly, electrons are affected exactly the same way by charges. Negative charge and negative polarity of a magnet will do the same thing to an electron. So it's the same force, and it's only because of Maxwell's bisection of the mathematics that they pretend it's magnetic when all it is another it's just an attribute of charge. The fact that electrons are different than protons in an inverse way, exactly the opposite in terms of how they react to the force, and the force has two components.
It is. And in my opinion, it's not a wave the way we think it's a wave.
It can appear wave-like, but anything at a frequency can appear wave-like.
Lattice models, ether models, and particle models. Solar wind consists primarily. Wow, do we have a real picture of something? Hey, Ted, I saw you popping in and out. Be welcome to say hello. Solar wind consists primarily of charged hydrogen. Okay. When these particles slam against oxygen-laden rocks, silicates could in principle form water. So precipitation salt star. Okay.
Yeah, they could, but frankly, the oxygen's usually in a form where it's already an oxidate. Okay, it's already an oxide. So it's already pretty well connected to something, and it's a little hard to turn rust back into steel, that kind of thing. So, sorry, I don't think you're going to win with that kind of explanation. That water's easily generated by just, bouncing some hydrogen off of something.
Medicine, without a doubt. A lot of other people say that. What about can it prove you can smoke? Oh, yeah, I did talk about that. That's it. Oh, let's deceive the people. Oh yeah. By the way, those people who talk about the flat Earth. Flat Earth is a prank, a large prank by a number of people who put that out there and are making it go as far.
Yes, well, expanding Earth is pretty pranky also. Tiny bits of contrary evidence, exploded into a whole conspiracy theory.
Duality my father came up with.
So this is their nutty view of a photon, except multiply these numbers by 1,000,000, and it just makes no sense. I mean, it takes the frequency out of the photon. It makes it some sort of gradual thing, which there's no evidence that photons gradually turn on and gradually turn off. No evidence at all. It arrives as a clump, as Feynman would say. It's a clump, okay? Clump, 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 clump. Doesn't arrive in gradual amounts.
This is an idealized way, so you can see it very easily. All of these dots are particles. Okay, they wouldn't be photons because photons, again, have a historical implication of carrying frequencies. So these are just regular photons. They could be rocks, they could be ping pong balls, they could be basketballs, they could be meteors, they could be suns.
Yes, they're the bits that make up the photon. So, like I said, I don't know why they chose to do this to the The obvious thing to do is just say clump. Okay, bit here, there's a bit here. And it's a quanta of energy, and it fits into the whole Planck thing. And so why would you do this? Why would you unplank? Well, because they're doing their little infinite universe bullshit.
Whatever. They will be traveling, and they will all be traveling together at the same speed.
And how do they do that? And how does an electron produce all of this crap and arrange it in this progressively on and off fashion? I mean, it's just bullshit. Way too complicated.
I've got a better picture here. I'll show you. This is a solution.
Way too many moving parts to create consistency.
Here we go. Two good pictures. It's not a book. Why don't you get a book? Oh, book's not pretty. See all those particles? They're coming in waves, right? Just like those bombers you see coming in?
Yeah, whatever. And the waves are wrong. The periods here are all wrong. There's no frequency here. So this clumpy thing, then you have to explain, well, how does the electron know that this is the part where there's a whole bunch of it and then there's a little bit of it? it really needs, the electron needs it to be kind of a clear statement. It needs empty space here, then a clump, then empty space, then a clump. That's how a frequency matters. If you make the frequency this flowy, it's a lot harder to make the frequency mean anything. So anyway, so I guess he didn't know that there's a guy in his waiting room. So he goes to all this trouble to keep emphasizing, come into the room, blah, blah, blah. And so the other guy's in there waiting, and he's not getting anywhere.
That statement makes sense to me. Okay, theoretical. Okay, we're just talking about. Well, it's okay, cool. You can read that if you'd like, folks. Interesting. All right, don't forget to explain antimatter. Antimatter is the same thing as charge. It's something that push and pull. That's even a better one. Push and pull don't exist in the universe.
Okay, so attraction and repulsion clearly do. Obviously, I would say it's all push, but blah blah blah. But to say, antimatter is the same as charge. I mean, charge has got huge volumes of evidence for the phenomenon of charge. The fact that this fundamental difference between the south end of the magnet and the north end of the magnet, it's just ludicrous to sit there and pretend it doesn't exist. To claim it's arbitrary. Antimatter is absolute horseshit, so there is no antimatter. I mean, that's just nonsense.
You push. But the pull is convenient because it's like pulling is actually pushing. Like here it is. This is sitting here. Right? I'm going to pull it toward me. Look, on your side that you're seeing in the camera, to me, I'm pulling it toward me. But to you, I'm pushing it. That's weird, isn't it? It's the same thing with matter and antimatter. It's just the way we explain things. It's just like, okay, we have a system of stability, and that, it's sort of like plus and minus, and that, if this comes in.
So again, it really isn't. You can't reduce charge to one thing and just say it's a gradient, and you have the thing or you don't have the thing. They're completely inverse in their reaction. It's not, it's not like there is the positive means no effect and the negative means attraction. They're opposite. You have to account for that.
Contact with that, it sort of annihilates something, and we get that, I think, from mostly from chemistry than anything. And so it's just a semantic. It's just meaning. It doesn't have any necessarily meaning in the real world.
All right. So again, it's just such a silly thing to argue that somehow you can dismiss the existence of the phenomenon that casually. It's a real phenomenon, Dave. You have to explain the difference.
Invite you to come on. The good thing about what this whole technology is, we go live to Facebook or YouTube, and you guys can come in. Just a reminder for those, just the next time around, if you are so inclined, I do not make fun of you. The only time I cut you off is if you can't come in here and are just trolling or bashing, or you're not interested. I will take all questions seriously. I don't really talk too much about UFOs or conspiracy theories much. I believe that there are kinds of wild things out there that are not good in mankind. I do know there are people who work in what they call the free energy area that have mysteriously disappeared, those kinds of things.
Oh, please. Whatever. Too stupid. Too stupid. I mean, just too stupid. The mysterious disappearance of the free energy man. There we go. So we have a mystic video with a kind of a crappy title, I'm afraid. Afraid to go there. I mean, the last video was on the nature of intelligence, essentially. Like, does intelligence mean anything? Is it a significant, does it play some role as a function? And I would argue that yes, it does, in the sense that logic's a real thing. Facts fit together by rules. And that's a real function, and an organism that's doing that well is different than an organism not doing that well. So there's no point in saying there's no difference. There's people who are dumb as a rock. That is, they're doing logic so badly that they might as well be a rock because they're not doing their computing thing very well. And there's devices that do it very well. There's computers that work really good, and there's computers that suck. It's just a fact at computing. Alright, anyway. So, till the next time and such. Hopefully didn't go past time here.